Today we write March 22nd, 2017, and the idea of liberty and democracy is in deep crisis in this world. Why is that? Well, we have to go back to the 1950s. There were dictatorships in Cuba and in Venezuela. In Cuba, Fidel Castro and his gang took power and they did this revolution, executed a lot of people and installed a communist dictatorship. In Venezuela, the people rose up and they installed a democracy. Now, it so happens that Venezuela has a lot of oil reserves. In fact, it has the world's largest oil reserves. And Fidel Castro, he needed money. So he puts his sights on Venezuela. His idea was not just limited to taking Cuba. He wanted to take all of Latin America, and Venezuela was to be the bridgehead and the source of the financing for the operation. So his first move was a little military operation similar to what they had done on Cuba, and that failed. They were beaten back by the Venezuelan military. That was in the early 60s. And then he tried to back up communist revolutionaries. That also failed. They were put in jail. And next he tried, let me see if I forget something now. I think the next thing, the third thing, was in the 1980s when he had infiltrated the military in Venezuela with people like Hugo Chavez. And he was trying to create an uprising and do a combined military-civilian uprising on what became known as the Caracazo in 1989. But when it happened, the Caracazo, the military part was not ready. But then he tried with a military coup, because he had Hugo Chavez by that time infiltrated in the presidential palace. He had been discovered, but the president reinstated him. So in 1992, Hugo Chavez tried a military coup, which failed, and he ended up in jail. And then his accomplices tried a second time in November that year. That also failed. So that was the fourth attempt of Fidel Castro to take control over Venezuela. Well, after that, he managed to get Hugo Chavez released from jail without having his civil liberties cancelled. So Chavez could run for president, and he did. And in 1998 he was elected president and installed in 1999. The first thing he did was to hold a so-called constitutional assembly and essentially abolish the whole state, all the institutions and the constitution. It was a judicial coup d'etat, which only was possible because the Supreme Court allowed it. So Venezuela became a dictatorship as a puppet regime under Cuba in 1999. Now, here's the thing. The West did not understand this. And they did not understand this because of the Cuban propaganda, which had been very effective. One of the things they did was Telesur, that was in the year 2000 though. So all of these media in Europe and a large part of them in the US were constantly being bombarded with the Cuban message of what Latin America is, with a discourse that's not really related to the reality. And therefore, the West saw what was happening in Venezuela as some kind of new socialism and a hope for a new form of democracy, while in reality it was a turn to an authoritarian regime. Well, meanwhile, of course, communism collapsed in Europe in 1989 and 1990, but it survived in Cuba. Cuba got in very deep troubles, but when they managed to take control over Venezuela, they got a new source of money and they could continue to exist. Of course, Venezuela has since been destroyed. It's now in a very difficult situation where people don't even have food or medicine. A lot of people, I think like 1 million or something, have fled the country. So But they maintain control. Maduro maintains control. And he does that using social media and using this propaganda. So I've been following what happened in Venezuela since about 2010. But let me go back now to 2000. In 1999, Chavez did this judicial coup d'etat. And of course the Venezuelans realized what was going on. And they started protesting. In the year 2002, Chavez fired the important people in the oil company in order to take control over the national oil company PDVSA, and thereby get his hands on the money that's generated from the oil, the main source of income of the country. So people did not allow that to happen without putting up the civil disobedience and resistance. So in 2002, in April, there was a big concentration of people, about 1 million in Caracas, and they marched to the presidential palace, Miraflores. But there, Chavez gave order to the military to activate what's called Plan Avila back then. That is, to send out the militaries with tanks to the street to beat down this peaceful march. The military refused to do it, except one official who sent out the tanks. But when his general discovered what he had done, he ordered him to send them back. However, those tanks did go out for a short while. They were recorded by TV, and later the Venezuelan propaganda used that to make the claim in a propaganda movie that it had been a military coup, while in reality it was the President Chavez himself who ordered the military to slaughter the civilians. So when the military refused to slaughter the civilians, the mayor of Caracas had placed snipers on some rooftops. So they were shooting down, they killed about 19 people. In Venezuela, like in other Latin American countries, the president has a right to commandeer the TV stations. So he ordered them to broadcast what he was saying. And he was saying that everything is fine, everything is peace and quiet. At the same time as they were shooting down civilians outside the presidential palace. But the TV stations, they split the screen. They showed the reality and what Chavez was saying side by side. And that, of course, led to such a big fury in the country that he was forced to resign. So April 11, 2002 was a schoolbook example of a non-armed, pacific, civilian march overthrowing an authoritarian president by civilian resistance. But the whole world, except the US, the whole world said that this had been a military coup. And that is because the Cuban propaganda had so big influence in Europe and the US and in other Western democracies. They take command through propaganda. So everybody was saying that had been a military coup, when in reality it was the civilians who had done the thing that civilians do when they defend democracy. This event was the first serious defeat of democracy in this millennium. Now, Chavez came back to power through his militaries, and he has held on to power ever since. The next important event was in Honduras. After they took Venezuela, they did similar things in other countries. In Ecuador, with Rafael Correa, who is still president there. In Bolivia, Evo Morales, still president there. And then they went for Honduras, Manuel Zelaya. But in Honduras, the institutions worked as they should. The Fiscal General, the Attorney General, asked the Supreme Court for an arrest order of the president when the president was openly disobeying an explicit prohibition from the Supreme Court to hold a referendum. The Supreme Court decision was totally clear. Nobody should participate in this, and the president went ahead to do it anyway, so the the Attorney General asked for an arrest order. The Supreme Court issued an arrest order to the military because of the circumstances with armed Venezuelan insurgents in Honduras who were ready to go against the police if he had sent the police. So he sent the military. And the military knew that the Venezuelans were also in positions in the prisons, so that they could not put him in any prison because they would risk an uprising there. So they sent him out of the country to Costa Rica. And the whole world, starting with Telesur, the Venezuelan-Cuban propaganda channel, called this a military coup. Afterwards, the whole world, I mean, including the US in this case, including President Obama. Afterwards, the Library of Congress, they have experts who do legal analysis. They were asked to analyze if this action was constitutional or not according to Honduras Constitution. And they found it was constitutional. They had done the right thing. Then Secretary Kelly asked them to redo it, to revisit it. Senator Kerry asked them to revisit this, and they revisited it and they came to the same conclusion. Honduras had acted according to their constitution to defend liberal democracy against a president who was acting in an authoritarian way outside of the law. And there were also hundreds of thousands of people in Honduras demonstrating in favor of what the military, the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, the Congress, the church, and everybody had said and done. It was all the institutions against the president. But the world and the United Nations sided with the president who was violating the Constitution. And that was the second case in this millennium when the democratic institutions who were supposed to defend liberal democracy in the world turned against liberal democracy, turned against the people who were defending their freedom and democracy. And that is why liberal democracy is now in such dire straits, because everybody sees that you can seize power, like Donald Trump in the White House. He can blatantly violate all the norms of democracy. He can refrain, he doesn't have to show his taxes. He can keep his company. He can stuff his pocket full of gold he's robbing from the country. He can do all of that because nobody is stopping him. They didn't stop Chavez. They went against those who stopped Zelaya. And they are not stopping Trump. The Republicans in Congress are allowing Trump to trample over the American Constitution. And they are not lifting a finger to stop him. The Republicans in Congress are equally guilty of treason as President Trump is. Now, this is something that started here, as I told you. It started down here. And the Cuban intelligence service, the G2, they have developed this psychological method of taking power. This happened before Putin came into power in Russia. So it was the Cubans who taught Russia, in my analysis, they were first here and then they taught Putin so he could start acting against the nascent democracies over here. So the evil has spread from Latin America back to the old world. What we are seeing, what I'm seeing here in the United States now with trolls and with bots, I've seen that for years in Venezuela and nobody here has paid attention. But this is not a new method. This is a method that has been refined for a number of years. And democracy is in very, very serious threat now. And by the way, if you wonder how to deal with these people, well, if you get into an argument with those trolls, that's a bad thing, because that's what they want. They want to create an argument in the group so that the group ceases to exist. What you should do is just ignore them. If you delete them, what they do is they post a nasty comment and then they take a screen dump. If you delete it, then they post the screen dump and say, look, why did you delete it? Why do you bar it? So just leave it there. Don't comment, don't reply, write something else without mentioning it so that their comments disappear in the sea of comments. And also they use bots to diffuse the messages and the stories that they want to spread. So those of you who do want to defend democracy, one important thing is to help share and spread the messages that are good for our side. Messages about unity and peace and cooperation and freedom and democracy, but those are so general terms. But we have to stand united, and we have to know and understand that democracy does not defend itself. Institutions cannot defend themselves. It is us, it is we the people who have to defend freedom and democracy and have to defend the institutions. Don't leave this for people in Washington to say. They can't do it. It's every one of us who have to do our part to defend freedom and democracy in the US and in the whole world, because this is a crucial moment. This is a watershed moment for what will happen in this world. Putin must be destroyed.